Hello everyone, I'm Ferlin Capina and today I will be going to discuss about the topic, the literature under the Spanish colonization, which is the subtopic is Maragtas. So in this topic, we will be tackling what is Maragtas, who wrote the Maragtas, what is the importance of legend Maragtas, what is behind in the code of Maragtas, and lastly, the Maragtas overview. What is Maragtas? The stories known as the Maragtas are legends that may or may not be based on the actual events in the remote past. They are about the 10 Datus or chiefs who escaped the tyranny of Datu Makatunaw of Borneo and immigrated to the island of Panay. So the Maragtas word is equivalent of the Spanish word historia. So the present-day speakers of Visayan know only the word as the title of the book or some pre-Hispanic manuscript believed to be the origin. So it is consideration of the latter opinion that the provenance of this contents of the book must be examined in detail. So the provenance of Maragtas begin with the author's own statement in his foreword to the readers. And now, let's move on to the next one, which is who wrote the Maragtas. So Pedro Alcantara Monteclaro wrote the Maragtas. So he is born on October 15, 1850, and he was the eldest son of Captain Bartolome Monteclaro y Tupas and Ramona Nacionales y Orbe. And also, he had three brothers, Ciriaco, Serafin, and Jose. So Pedro received his early training and education from his parents who were devout Roman Catholics. So as I've said, so Pedro Monteclaro wrote the Maragtas and was born in Milagua, Iloilo on October 15, 1850. And he also graduated from the Seminario College de Haro in 1865. So was twice married and had 5 children, and also he served as the Teniente Mayor in 1891 and Gobernadorcillo in 1894 and become a local hero during Revolution and the American invasion. So he serves as a liaison officer during the American occupation of the era and was first the president of Miagao in 1901 to 1903. So during which period he began to search which resulted in publication of the Maragtas. Pedro also wrote the Maragtas in the first inhabitants of Panay. He even refrained from writing it because it is for the burning desire to reveal that the public to the data which he gathered from the records. So the first inhabitants of Panay is the arrival of the Datus and from Borneo and their settlement in the lands. So they're spread to different parts of the islands and their costumes and habits until the Spaniards came and ruled to the Philippines. So in order for Pedro, which is the reader of Maragtas, not accuse him of having merely composed the book from just imagination, so he wished to mention 2 manuscripts he found. So one is given to him by an 18 to 82-year-old man who had been the first teacher in the town. So it was given by the old man's grandfather. So the long years which the manuscript must have passed of the history wore out the paper so much that is impossible to handle. So the other manuscripts he found is in the bamboo tube where Monteclaro's grandfather used to keep that old papers. So the manuscript was so brittle or so old, that's why he could hardly handle it without tearing it into pieces. So he copied these records in a book on June 12, 1901 as a memoir or as a memories for the town of Miagao, but did not publish them for the reason stated that beside he is waiting for someone better qualified to write a history of the island of Panay from the time of its inhabitants. So let's move on to the next one. What is the importance of legend Maragtas? So Monteclaro regarded as an important part of Visayan heritage, so he collected the various stories of the earlier leap of Panay and published them in his Maragtas. So some people have claimed that Monteclaro actually translated the Maragtas from ancient pre-Hispanic manuscript, but in the preface of the book, he clearly stated that he himself was its author. According to the legend, these 10 chiefs and their families are very ancestors of the entire Visayan population. So this is the legend that has been celebrated yearly in the Ati-Atihan festival since the late 1950s, when it became part of the annual fest of the Santo Niño and Kalibu Aklan. So the 10 datus are namely Puti, Sumakwil, Bangkaya, Palborong, Padolhinog, Dumangsol, Dumalogdog, Lubay, Valenzuela, and Umangsil. So in Maragtas, there are 6 chapters and the epilogue. So the first chapter describes the former customs, clothes, dialect, heredity, organization, and the others of the Aitas of Panay, with special mention of Maricudo, son of old chief Paul Pulan. So the second chapter also includes that begins the narrative of the 10 datos, flight from Borneo, and the tyranny of the Datu Makatunaw there. So, and their purchase of the island of Panay from Maricudo. The third chapter tells of the romance of Sumakwil, Kapingan, and her lover Gorong Gorong. And the fourth chapter concludes the tale of 10 datus telling of their political arrangements and their circumnavigation of the island. And the fifth chapter describes language, commerce, clothing, costumes, marriages, funerals, and mourning habits. And also cockfighting, timekeeping techniques, calendars, and personal characteristics. So the last chapter, which is the 6th chapter or the final chapter, gives a list of Spanish officials between 1637 and 1808. So an epilogue contains a few 18th century dates. So the document translated by Father Santiran tells the same story of the 10 datus and their purchase of the island from Negritos and one of their leaders' mental problems, names of the deities, slaves, and descendants to the 5th generation, and all of the list of more than 158 place names connected with their settlements of Panay. And now, let's move on to what is behind in the Code of Maragtas. So, even though Monteclaro did describe the costumes and rules of Sumakwil's community, he never made reference to any code of Sumakwil or Code of Maragtas. Indeed, Maragtas was simply the title of his own book and word which was supposed to mean history. So, thus any Code of Maragtas that predated his book would be highly suspect from the start. So in 1938 also, the Maragtas Code only first appeared in an article entitled El Código de Maragtas, written by Guillermo Santiago Quino. The Maragtas Code. So the exceptional passage of historic significance which does not occur in the Historia de los Primeros Datos comprises the 4th, 5th, 6, and 7 paragraphs of the chapter 5 of the Maragtas. So this chapter is description of a variety of general cultural information such as the social costumes, the Visayan equivalents of the days of the wind and dialect differences. So among the costumes, there are 4 stringent sections, which is the first one is those too lazy to work were banded over to the wealthy until they reform, failing which they were cast out of society to live with negritos and breed half-castle offspring. The second one is polygamy was practiced until population control became necessary. It was restricted to the well-to-do and the children of those too poor to support them drone. So the third one also is unredeemed adultery was punished by death or disinheritance. And the fourth one is fingers of thieves were cut off. So these statements can be authenticated as an actual pattern of life practiced by pre-Hispanic Filipinos. So at least they are not phrased in the Maragtas as laws. It is stated that the most serious and the most severely punished offense was layness, which is technically untrue since other offenses were punished by the death. So although the author did not provide any data or clue by which the authenticity of this code could be established, so the available evidence suggests that the Maragtas Code should be dated in the 4th decade and the 20th century of the earliest. And now let's move on to the last part of this discussion, which is the Maragtas overview. So first is, it is a history of Panay came from the first inhabitants and the Bornean immigrants from which the Bisayans are descended prior to the arrival of the Spaniards. And the second word is the word maragtas was the Spanish equivalent of the history. And the third one is Guillermo Santiago Queno considered it that corruption of the Sanskrit term great people or great country. And the last one is the contents of the maragtas include the publisher's introduction, which is the foreword to the readers by Salvador Laguda, and there are 6 chapters and the epilogue. So, author's concluding statement to his countrymen in the island of Panay. Also, in addition of this overview, so the Maragtas also is an original work by Pedro Monteclaro that published in Mix, Hiligaynon, and Kiniraya in Iloilo 1907. So which claims that to be nothing more than that, it was based on the written and oral sources of the available. And it contains 3 sort of subject matter: folk customs that still being practices or remembered by old folks. So the description of an idealized political confederation whose the existence there are reasonable grounds in 1858 of a migration of Bornean settlers. So some of whom are still remembered as folk heroes, pagan deities, or progenitors of part of the present population of the Panay. So there is no reason to doubt that this legend preserves the memory of some actual event, but also it is not possible to date the event itself or to decide which is the details are historic facts and which are the embellishments of generations of oral transmissions. So that would be all about the discussion of the literature under the Spanish colonization, the subtopic which is the Maragtas. So thank you so much. If you have any clarification or questions, so just ask me.